Hi guys, welcome to the Art of Server and welcome back to part 3 of the R810 storage upgrade series. This is the final video in this series, and as I alluded to in the last video, I'm going to show you another upgrade path for storage on the R810, and this also happens to be an option that will apply to the R720 as well, so long as you have the 2.5-inch bays. And today we're going to show you how to upgrade these servers with these SSDs. Now these are, at first glance, look like your normal SAS or SATA SSD, but in fact they are U.2 NVMe SSDs. And so I have here an Intel DCP 3600 series 400 gigabyte U.2 SSD. Now if you look at it, initially it looks like it has a normal SAS connector, but it's actually quite different. Let me show you in comparison to the SAS SSDs that we tested out in the last video. If you kind of look at the connectors, you'll notice that yes, physically they look very similar, but electrically there's some differences here. You'll notice, for example, that on the SAS-3 on the left here, there are no pins on the bottom side of this bridge between the power and the data connection, whereas on the U.2 there are it looks like appears to be 6 pins on that bridge area. Also, it's probably a little bit hard to see in the camera here, but on the back side of the SAS connector there are no pins other than on the bridge for the secondary data channel, and that's all there is, while on the U.2 there are actually a whole array of pins on the back side. And so these are SSDs that are meant to be connected directly to the PCIe bus. There is no SAS controller or anything involved there, and whereas the SAS-3 does require a SAS-3 controller like we showed in the last video. So although mechanically they look very similar, electrically they are quite different. And so what I have here is well, this is just a sample, but I have 4 of these in this drive cage. And so what I have here is a actual NVMe, an official Dell NVMe upgrade kit for the 12th generation Dell servers. This kit does fit the R720 as well as the R820. And in order for this kit to work, obviously you need the SSDs, but you also need the drive cage with the backplane. Now, it might be possible to fit the backplane into a drive cage that's not an official one for the NVMe SSDs. I haven't tried that, but looking at it, it kind of looks like it might actually work that way. So if you already have an spare drive cage and you're just looking for the backplane, you might be able to get away with just getting the backplane. All right, but anyway, this is the official NVMe upgrade kit drive cage, and so you will notice on the top here it says PCIe SSD, and you'll notice that we only have 4 bays, and that's all we can afford in terms of PCIe lanes for this backplane. And so this other half of this drive cage is basically has just a blank and there's nothing in it. On the back here we have the NVMe backplane, and so there are 4 U.2 slots on this side here, and they are connected to these 4 SFF 8087 ports. So at first glance you might think that looks like a SAS port, but these basically SAS cables, they're equivalent to SAS cables, are being used to transmit the PCIe lanes directly from the PCIe bus of the system. In addition to this, if you are going to be buying this upgrade kit, and by the way, there are a lot of different parts here. I'm not going to read all the part numbers just because there's just quite a few of them, but I will leave the part number details down in the video description below with affiliate links for you to find these parts on eBay. And so if you are going to pursue this upgrade path, go check that out for the details. So anyway, in addition to this backplane, you do need these 2 additional cables. So if you're going to buy this kit, make sure that you get these cables. One of these cables is for power, to power the backplane, which powers the SSDs, and the other one is a data cable that communicates to the motherboard. And so I'm not exactly sure what the signaling is exactly for, but I suspect it's probably to, for example, detect presence of an SSD on the backplane and that type of stuff. So you will need these 2 cables with this backplane. Sometimes if you're buying these kits used, they pull off these cables and throw them away or do something else. Make sure you get a kit with the cables, or make sure you get the cables in addition to the backplane if you don't, if the backplane you get doesn't come with the cables. Okay, so like I said, this connects to the PCIe bus. So you have the SSDs to the backplane. The backplane has those SFF8087 connectors. You need to connect those to the PCIe bus, and that's done through this cable set here. So this is the official cable set that goes with this kit, and again, I will leave a part number 2, these cables, down in the video description. They look like ordinary SAS cables with SFF8087 connectors on both ends. I don't actually know if they are wired just like the SAS cables, so I don't know if you can substitute normal SAS cables instead of using this official cable kit. But if you get the official cable kit, it is nicely labeled. It has controller PCIe D, C, B, and A labeled on this side. Nothing labeled on this other side. But anyway, you know, probably safest bet to get this cable. It is almost just the right length for the installation, so might as well do that. All right, so once you have the cables connected to the backplane, that has to connect to the PCIe bus of the system, and you do that with this card here. So this card is a by 16 PCIe card that splits those PCIe lanes into 4x4 SFF8087 connectors. And like I said, this is not a SAS controller. You might look at this and say, oh, this looks like some sort of SAS expander or something like that, but it is not. It is for transmitting these PCIe lanes over those SFF8087 ports to this backplane to enable you to connect these NVMe drives into the server. All right, so again, I'm going to leave all the part numbers to this kit, all the details, including the blanks, the cage, the backplane, the cables, the SFF8087 cables, and as well as this PCIe bridge chip or whatever it is, you know, this card is. So anyway, if you are going to pursue this, yeah, definitely go check out all the details in the video description down below. It took me some time to kind of research this and find all the correct part numbers. And so anyway, today we're going to go ahead and upgrade my R820 with this kit, and then we're going to boot it up and log into a OS and test out the performance of these 4 NVMe SSDs with this upgrade. Alright guys, so here we are inside the R820. Again, we're going to have to remove the top motherboard. We're going to remove the fans because we need to connect the backplane cables to the motherboard under here. So let's go ahead and just remove all that and clear some room. Alright, so here's the plan. There are connectors on the motherboard right here that says BP2, BP3, and BP-SIG3, BP-SIG2. So I think I'm going to use the BP2. It's interesting that there is a BP3. I'm not really sure what that's for because I can't imagine that the third backplane can fit in this system. So, but I don't know. Maybe there is such a configuration. So we're going to put the drive cage over here. We're going to replace this blank with that drive cage that I just showed you. We're going to connect that to BP2 on the motherboard, and we're going to put the PCIe bridge card over here. Now that bridge card is a full profile card, so in the R820 it has to fit here on RAID-1. On the R720, I believe the RAID-1 area is going to be a low profile, so you won't be able to fit it there. It'll probably have to fit in the RAID-2 area, which is, I believe, a full profile on the R720. So just make note of that difference if you're installing this upgrade kit on a R720. All right, so let me get some screwdrivers. Let's get this cage out and put the drive cage in first. All right, so there are 2 screws holding the, let me just move this cable out of the way a little bit. This is the data cable to that first backplane. There are 2 screws here. One more on this side. Let me just kind of get that out of the way. All right, so with the 2 screws removed, I believe this drive cage, I can just push it right out. Yep, there we go. All right, it's getting a little bit stuck here. All right, just a little bit more force, and it looks like it can come right out. All right, let me change the camera angle so you can kind of see how that works. All right, as you can see, the drive blank or the drive cage blank is coming out, so all I have to do, I believe, is just pull the rest of it out, and I'll put this aside. Alright, so now we're just going to install the NVMe drive cage with the backplane. I'll just kind of guide these cables in first. And then I should be able to slide the entire cage right in there. Okay, it's a little bit of a tight fit. All right, let's try this again. Alright guys, sorry I had to cut the video there because I was having a hard time getting this drive cage into the server here, and I tried a couple of different things and nothing was really working, and so I ended up figuring out that it's a lot easier to install this when you have everything taken apart. So I've taken out the drives, I've disconnected the two cables, and I'm going to take out this blank as well as the backplane itself. And so this might just kind of show you the process. So you basically press on this blue thing here and the backplane itself comes right out. Okay, so I'm going to put those aside for a second here, and now I'm going to just install the bare cage by itself. Alright, so for whatever reason, with everything inside, this just seems to have a really hard time fitting in. And I found that it's easier if you just take the whole thing apart, install the cage by itself first, and then we can put all the pieces back together. So I just want to share that with you guys in case you're following along this video and you're having a hard time installing this kit. Try taking it all apart and just install the cage first. Alright, so I've got the blank in there. Let's go ahead and put the backplane on the back side. Okay, so to get the backplane here, there are two little notches right here that fit in there and over here, so you want to kind of angle it in a little bit first and get it into those notches, and then these two little hooks will also hook onto the top, and then you just press it in, and then that'll snap in. And so it should be pretty secure once that's in. And then all I need next are the two cables, so let me deal with the power cable first. So this is to the back plane. Okay, so the power connector here, I guess I can put these other, well, you know what, hold on. Before I do that, let me go ahead and secure the drive cage and everything with the screws here, just so I don't forget that. Once I get the cables in there, it might be a little bit hard to get the screws into those holes. So let me do that first. Okay. All right. Now let's get back to the cables. So this is to the back plane that goes down here. All right, and okay, let me put some of these cables back into the little cable holders. And this goes in here. So there's a backplane power connector here on the motherboard. I'll plug it right in there and then see if I can tuck this cable also into the little cable holder over there. Alright, and then we have the data cable. And so that side says MB, so that's for the motherboard side. And then this side must be for the backplane. So this is, hopefully you guys can see that a little bit, but move my hand out of the way. Basically I'll just press this in there. Oops. Oh, well, that's interesting. The back plane is still loose. Oh, you know what? I put the screws in the wrong hole. So let me take that out. Sorry about that, guys. This is the first time I'm actually installing this kit, so I gotta do it in the... Alright, so that should get it in there now. Let me fix the other screw as well. Yeah, definitely do the screws before the cables. So you can see the cables are kind of getting in the way here. Let me see if I can... Alright, so hopefully that does it. You know, I might need another screw here because this screw actually holds onto the blank, as you can see if I move the blank. So I'll have to go find another screw that might fit in there. I don't have a spare screw, but I don't want the blank to kind of fall out. So I'll need another screw to secure that blank later on. But anyway, we got the data cable. Let's get back to getting all the cabling down. The data cable then goes into this connector here. All right. Okay, so let me see if I can wrap this cable into that cable holder right there. Alright, so hopefully that's good enough. Well, let's see. That doesn't seem ideal, but maybe like this. Alright, that seems a little bit better. So make sure the connections are good. Alright, so let me go put the SSDs back into the... Okay, so I'm going to just install the SSDs back in here. Yeah, definitely I was having a hard time getting this cage in with all the stuff already inside the drive cage, so it's definitely a lot easier to do this with the all that stuff removed. So just a little tip for you guys who are following along. Alright, so drive cage is installed, backplane, cabling, all that is done. Let's go ahead and get back to the inside of the server and get the rest installed. Alright, so we got the backplane in there. Let's see if I can get this cabling in. Let's remove all the caps on the cable here. Oh, okay, I didn't notice this earlier, but see if I can show you. These connectors are actually labeled. They were just labeled on the head, not on the cable itself. So that goes to A, B, C, and D. All right, and also on the backplane, they are labeled A, B, C, and D. That D connector is a little bit tight there. Alright, so got the cables connected. Let's see if I can run this into the cable channel here. There's quite a few cables here, so I don't know how well this is going to fit. It should fit. Alright, that looks like it fits. Now these cables are tied up over here, but I don't really think that's helping me, so I'm going to cut that tape. Alright, I'm just going to take this tape off here. just route this independently. Might make it a little bit easier. Now for the second cable. Yeah, that is quite a lot of cable to fit in here. And I'm going to fit the... Yeah, this is definitely a very tight fit with all this thick cabling. Like I said, I've never installed this kit before. Alright, so I guess it can be made to fit, but it is a very tight fit. Now I do need to put the PCIe bridge card into this riser, so let me pull this out. I'm not really sure which slot would be ideal at this point, but I'm going to try. Okay, so reading the print on the riser board here, this is a by 8 connected to the CPU 2, and this is by 16, so I think we're going to have to use the top slot since that's an actual by 16, electrically by 16 slot. So that choice, I think, is already determined by that. Let's see. I think this comes out, doesn't it? Okay. Make some room. And this little blue bracket has these little notches that hold the board. So I guess as I slide it back in, I want to make sure that that engages the board. Now I can't really see the board anymore, but I know that this port is labeled A. Just kind of looking at it from the side here, this is A, B, C, and D. So keeping that in mind, let's see if we can get these cables in there in the right order. Alright, let's get the caps off of these. Alright, so I know A, let me start with that. A goes in here. B goes in the next one. You know what, there's a little cable holder thing right here on this black bracket. I'm going to take advantage of that to help me kind of hold the cables in place. Okay, and then C, next one, and then D. Alright, so that looks like how it's going to go. Yeah, definitely, I can't see how you can install this with these two cables taped together. So definitely cut the cable. Maybe this cable is more designed for the R720 where this board would have been installed in the middle. But in any case, it should still work here. Alright, so everything looks good so far. Let me go ahead and put the fan wall and the second motherboard back in and just make sure everything's still going to fit. Alright, so here is the fan wall. Okay. That looks like it's fitting just right. All right, let's get the motherboard. All right, so everything looks like it actually does fit. And these cables are just at the edge of the motherboard there. So this is actually, it's very tight fit, but it does fit. All right, so that's the end of the actual physical hardware upgrade. Let me close this guy up and then we'll turn it on, boot up into CentOS 7 and see if we see the NVMe drives. We'll run a couple of benchmarks and see how they perform. All right, guys, so I'm logged into the server via SSH right now. And first thing, I'd like to just kind of verify that all that hardware that we just put in is actually visible to the operating system. So I'm going to run lspci and I'll do the tree view. Let's take a look here. So lots of connected devices here. All right, so right here, we see Intel data center SSDs. And so those are the only 4 Intel SSDs in that system. So this must be it. And we can see the tree of connected devices here. So these 4 SSDs are showing up as PCI devices, 46 through 49. That is connected to these devices here, and which is like 45 through 49, I guess, and then 44 through 49, which is then connected to 40. So let's just kind of look through this PCI device tree just from the top and see if we can identify what we're looking at here. All right, so we know the top device here is 40 and it's connected to this branch here, 03.3. So let's take a look at that. So that's 40, 03.3, or sorry, 03.0. All right, so this looks like it's the PCI root port from the processor, I think. And so let's go further down the tree here. So this is then connected to device 44 through 49. Let's take a look at those two. So that's 44. All right, so here we have PLX Technology. So that is a PCI switch company that is now owned by Broadcom, or what a lot of you guys might know as LSI. Okay, so this is definitely that card with the 4 ports that is basically a PCI switch. So let's take a closer look at this. We can see the vendor ID there, and we can see this product code here. So let's take a look at this by the vendor and product 8632. All right, so we can see that we have 4 devices here from that PCI switch. Okay. Well, this is interesting. Something I wasn't really expecting, but if you take a look here, it says it's a 12-port PCI Express Gen 2 at 5 gigatransfers per second. So this system and those SSDs are actually PCI Gen 3 or PCIe 3.0. But it looks like this PCI switch is a 2.0 switch only. We'll have to investigate. Well, you know what? Let's take a look at what the link All right, so I'm going to look at all those devices again, and I'm going to get some device properties out of that, and we'll look for specifically link status. Yeah, okay, so definitely this is PCIe 2.0. You can see here that we have a by 16 connection. So that's the connection on the PCIe switch that's connected directly to that riser, because remember we put it in a by 16 slot. And there are 4x4 connections. So those are the SFF 8087 ports that are connected to that backplane, each one of them carrying 4 PCIe lanes. But you'll notice the speed here is they're all at 5 gigatransfers per second. So that's definitely PCIe 2.0 speeds and not PCIe 3.0 speeds. Yeah, so that is kind of a surprise. I wonder why Intel, or not Intel, but Dell used a PCIe 2.0 switch for this kit. I'm not really, well, you know, let's take a look here. I'm just kind of curious. Let's go to Google, and what was that? It is a PLX 8632. So let's do a quick search for this. PLX 8632, and there's a link from Broadcom, so I'm going to go with that because that's basically the company. All right, so the PEX 8632 device offers 32 PCI Express Gen 2 lanes capable of configuring up to 12 flexible ports. Yeah, so this is definitely a PCIe Gen 2 PCI switch on that card. And I was actually hoping that it would be a Gen 3, considering that this generation of hardware is all Gen 3 anyway. That's really surprising to me. So, well, okay, so that means that at 4 lanes, we're looking at about 500 megabytes. So Gen 2 speeds will give you about 500 megabytes per second per PCI lane. So at by 4, that means we're going to be seeing about 2000 megabytes per second theoretical max per connection to the SSD. So that is still better than SAS-3, for example, which I think maxes out at around 1 point something gigabytes per second. This is at least going to be about almost 2 gigabytes per second. So there is a little bit more bandwidth room there than the SAS-3 upgrade that we did in the last video. But it's definitely not the Gen 3 that I was hoping for, which would give us about 7.8 gigabytes per second bandwidth per, or not per, but well, per connection to the SSD with the by 4 PCI lanes. But that said, the SSDs that I have in here, so let's take a look at those. So these are, let's just take a really quick look at this. I don't think the bandwidth limitation is going to be horrible for these particular SSDs because they're just not the highest performing ones. But let's take a look at what they're marketed as. Okay, so they're marketed as capable of sequential reads of 2100 megabytes per second. So we're a little bit under that at 2000 megabytes per second. We're just a little bit under that, so we might not see the full read performance of these SSDs with the PCIe 2.0 switch in there. But as far as writes are concerned, it really doesn't even approach anything close to 2000 megabytes per second. So, you know, we're not going to really lose out on any write performance here with these particular SSDs. But if you were to use a higher performing SSDs, then I think this PCIe 2.0 restriction on this PLX switch would be more of a bottleneck or more of a hindrance. So with that in mind, if you do pursue this upgrade path And I'm just kind of learning this as I go here. But the thing that's coming to mind now is that, okay, I'm kind of glad that I got the P3600 U.2 SSDs, because if I got anything more performant than this, I would probably be bottlenecked by that PCIe switch anyway. Now, of course, these SSDs are not the most high performing in terms of writes. So if you got something with, if you needed more write bandwidth, more write performance, then getting a faster SSD would be okay. You still, there's plenty of headroom compared to this 550 up to 2000, right? So there is headroom for that to add a more write performant SSD in here to take advantage of what is available, which is the PCIe 2.0 by 4. But anything that goes beyond 2000 megabytes per second on either reads or writes would essentially be pointless in this case, because this particular PLX PCI switch isn't capable of more than that. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. That is news to me. I wasn't really expecting this, but I'm just sharing with you guys as we go along here. Okay, so anyway, let's get back to business. That was certainly an interesting discovery here. You know what? I want to check one other thing here. Let's take a look at, so looking at the tree that we looked at earlier. Oops. Oh, forgot a dash. Okay, so we were looking at these 4 SSDs right there, right? So let's actually look at those specific devices. Let me see if I can just pull those out. So they are 8086 for Intel's vendor code, and the product code is 0953. Okay, so yeah, so they're showing up as non-volatile memory controller by Intel, PCIe data center SSD, and product is DCP3600 SSD. Okay, yeah, so this is definitely those 4 devices. Now, what I want to do here is I just want to confirm that they are linking at, so we'll look at link status on the SSDs themselves. So remember, these are PCI devices, and so they should show, yep, okay, so definitely they're also linking as expected, but I just kind of wanted to verify at 5 gigatrans per second, so that's definitely PCIe 2.0 speeds. They are getting the full by 4 PCIe lanes on each of those SSDs, but here's the thing. I bet that the capacity or the capability is going to be 3.0, right? So yeah, so you see these guys are actually capable of 3.0 speeds. You can see the speed capability is 8 gigatransfers per second, so that's PCIe 3.0 speeds. But because of the PCIe 2.0 switch that we have in here, it's negotiating down to PCIe 2.0 speeds. All right, so I just want to kind of confirm that everything makes sense, although it was a little unexpected, but at least everything is connecting the way that makes sense. All right, so let's get going. Just as with last time, all right, let me clear this. All right, so I'm going to switch over to this screen here. And just as I've done in the last videos, or last couple of videos, I'm going to be running a benchmark on, so I'm going to run a couple of different benchmarks. I'm going to do a DD sequential write, DD sequential read with 1 megabyte record sizes. So this is just to kind of get a ballpark figure, are we in the right ballpark or not? Then we're going to then run a real benchmark with IOZone. So we'll do sequential writes and reads with 1 megabyte blocks, random writes and reads also with 1 megabyte blocks. And then we will do the 4K over here with sequential writes, sequential read, 4K, and then random writes and random reads at 4K as well. I'm going to run these benchmarks across 4 different configurations. First, we'll do it on a single SSD just to get a baseline of what each SSD can do. And we just saw earlier from Intel's marketing page that it's about 2 gigabytes reads and about half a gigabyte writes, at least according to Intel. We'll see what our benchmarks actually demonstrate. And then I'm going to take those 4 SSDs, I'm going to make them into a RAID 0 with software RAID, and then run all those tests again. And then finally, I'm going to configure those 4 SSDs with ZFS in a RAIDZ1. And so this is a little bit different than last time because, you know, in the previous videos we've had 8 devices, so it makes more sense to use RAIDZ2 when you have enough devices. But with RAIDZ1 going, with the 4 SSDs going with RAIDZ2, we really wouldn't gain anything. You know, at that point, then you might as well use like a RAID 10 type of scenario. You know, we're going to do a RAIDZ1 instead. So we'll have 1 parity disk and 3 of those SSDs as, for data in the stripe. Okay, so we'll rerun all those benchmarks with this RAIDZ1 configuration across those 4 NVMe SSDs. All right, so that's what we're going to do today. And let's go ahead and get started with at least one of them. All right, so we have, you know what, I'll just pick the first one. So let's, all right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and make a file system on that now. Okay, and let's go ahead and mount that. All right, so we have a roughly 400 gigabyte SSD now mounted under /data. Okay, so first thing, and well, by the way, in case you didn't watch the second part, this machine has 1.5 terabytes of RAM, but I booted up with a kernel option where mem equals hg, so that there's only 8 gigabytes of addressable memory to the kernel. So I'm basically limiting the amount of available memory artificially so that these benchmarks, when we run them, we're not seeing the effects of caching in RAM and stuff like that. So just want to mention that in case you haven't watched the previous videos where I've explained that. I didn't really explain that much in this video, so I just want to kind of mention that before we get started. All right, so we have it mounted under /data. Let's go ahead, progress. We'll get a bunch of zeros, write it. To that file in under /data, 1 megabyte block sizes, and we'll do 10 gigabytes of writes. All right, so we got about 514 megabytes per second, which is consistent with what we saw in Intel's marketing material for these SSDs. All right, so at this point, I'm going to drop any caches, and we'll do a sequential read. And we'll send this to dev null, again with 1 megabyte block sizes. All right. Okay, so we're seeing about 699 megabytes per second, almost 700. So that is quite a bit less than what the Intel marketing material is saying. So that's kind of interesting because remember the Intel Arc site said that these can do a sequential read of about 2,000 megabytes per second. We know we're connecting at PCIe 2.0 speeds, but even at 2.0 speeds with 4 lanes, we should be able to get over a gigabyte for sure, and probably closer to 2 gigabytes. Maybe with some overhead and whatnot, we might not exactly hit 2 gigabytes, but yeah, that is definitely quite a bit less than I was expecting for the sequential reads. But again, this is DD, so when we run IOZone, let's see what that actually tells us, because this is not always completely accurate, but it does kind of give us a ballpark figure. All right, let's go ahead and record this. All right, so for the IOZone test, we're going to /data, and in here we'll run IOZone. So I'm going to use 256 megabyte file sizes, and because we're going to have 32 threads, So that will give us about a total data set of about 8 gigabytes, which will exceed the amount of RAM that we have here for sure. So we're going to use 1 megabyte records. We're going to do dash I0, which is the initial sequential write test, dash I1, which is the sequential read test, and then dash I2, which will give us the random read and write test. And we're going to use 32 threads because I have 32 CPUs in the system. We'll have a stride size of 64, and I want to record CPU utilization, and I will use direct IO option here. So, all right, let's go ahead and see how this turns out. All right, guys, it looks like the benchmark completed, and we're definitely seeing some higher numbers in terms of sequential reads or even random reads here. So yeah, definitely that DD test in the beginning, you know, was probably bottlenecking maybe at the single thread or something like that. But anyway, let's go ahead and record the results here. All right, next up, we're going to rerun that test with 4K record sizes. All right, let's go. All right, looks like the 4K IO zone test is done. Let's go ahead and record these results. All right, just want to take a quick moment to look at the results here. So basically the DD test told us we're kind of in the ballpark as far as write speeds. The sequential read was not quite what we were expecting based on what we saw in the Intel marketing or the ARC website, basically. So that could have been a result of a single thread being the bottleneck here. I'm not really sure. But anyway, like I've always said, DD is not a great benchmark, but it does kind of tell you whether you're in the ballpark or not. But IO zone definitely is more consistent with what the marketing material was telling us that these SSDs could perform. So sequential writes on 1 megabyte record sizes was about 461 megabytes a second. The sequential reads was about 1.6 gigabytes per second, which is getting closer to that 2100 megabytes that was mentioned on the ARC Intel website. But again, keep in mind, we may be seeing a bottleneck at the PCIe switch here because it only does PCIe 2.0. Okay, and then as far as 1 megabyte random reads and writes, we're basically seeing more or less the same performance, and that's sort of expected because we're just dealing with the same record sizes, and SSDs, you know, don't really have a penalty for random writes or random IO, basically, like hard drives do, because there's no ARM to actuate and stuff like that. Sequential reads, or when we go to the 4K test, we see that the performance is for sequential writes is about the same, but sequential reads is we're starting to see about half of that performance. So definitely with these much smaller record sizes, I think we're hitting an IOPS limit on the SSDs. And so we're hitting about 850 megabytes per second there. And likewise on the random 4K read and writes, we're basically seeing similar numbers to the sequential reads and writes at 4K. All right, so that gives us a baseline of what this single SSD can do. So the next step here is to combine all 4 of those SSDs and put them in a RAID-0 just to get a kind of theoretical maximum performance of all that we have, or basically what we installed today. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a single partition for all the other NVMe drives, and then we're going to combine that together with MD80M into a RAID-0. Alright, so I've got the partitions created. Let's go ahead and create that RAID-0 as devmd0. We have 4 devices. This will be RAID-0. Zero through 3. Alright, so it looks like we have our RAID-0 set up, and let's go ahead and make a file system on that. Okay, and mount it. Alright, so here we have the 1.5 terabyte RAID-0 combination of all 4 of those SSDs under /data. Alright, so we'll start out with the DD test. Guys, I just want to point out here, if you were looking on the screen on this side, you'll see that DD was maxing out almost 100% CPU. So we're definitely seeing the limitations of a single threaded DD run. So these numbers obviously are going to be limited compared to what the actual hardware will be able to do. So, but anyway, it's just a ballpark figure. Let's just go ahead and record this and move on to the actual real benchmark with the IO zone. Alright, so let's actually run the IO zone benchmarks again with 1 megabyte record sizes. And for this test, I'm going to use 1 gigabyte files since we have the entire array of 4. 1 megabyte blocks or record sizes. And so with 32 threads, that's a total working data set of 32 gigabytes. We're going to run the sequential write, read, and random read and write tests. All right, here we go. All right, the IO zone test is complete. So let's go ahead and record these results, but we've got some pretty awesome numbers here, and I'll get to it once I record it and we'll kind of discuss it a little bit. Alright guys, so I got the numbers recorded here, and just as I suspected, this number with the DD, the single threaded DD, was bottlenecked at the CPU, because you can see that with the IO zone and 32 threads, basically 1 thread per CPU on the system, we are hitting about 6.5 almost 6.5 gigabytes per second. And so if you look at that compared to the performance of a single SSD, it is roughly about 4 times. And so we're scaling almost linearly from the performance of a single NVMe drive to 4 NVMe drives in RAID-0. And likewise, you can see the similar result in the sequential write test. So we're looking at, this is the 1 megabyte test, went from 461 to about 1850. So that's again almost quadruple the performance of a single drive. So yeah, with RAID-0 and these SSDs, we're really seeing a very linear scale here. So that's kind of awesome. And as we have seen in the past, the random IO on 1 megabyte blocks basically performs almost the same as the sequential IO on 1 megabyte blocks. We see a slight decrease here on the random reads by about 100 megabytes per second there, but you know, that's really insignificant difference there. So all right, so let's go ahead and rerun the test with 4K block sizes and see what numbers we get. All right, here we go. Alright guys, so we just finished the IO zone test with 4K record sizes. Let's go ahead and record these. Alright guys, done recording all the benchmark results for the RAID-0 set. And so I just want to quickly discuss this. Like I've said earlier, we're seeing a linear scale up when we're talking about 1 megabyte record sizes across the board with writes and reads and random IO. But when we get to the 4K tests, these last 4 here, we're seeing that the scale up is a little bit hindered, and that's probably because we're demanding a lot more IOPS with those small record sizes, and so we're not seeing as great of a throughput as we did with the larger 1 megabyte record sizes. And so you'll see, in fact, sequential read is underperforming sequential writes, even though the SSD itself, a single SSD, usually outperforms the write speeds. So you'll see, for example, here on a single SSD, we have about for 4K sequential reads, we have about 854 megabytes per second throughput, whereas the sequential writes at 4K was 459. So it's a little bit under double in terms of read versus write performance, but we're actually seeing a reverse of that in the RAID-0 here. For the 4K, we're seeing this coming out to about 1234 megabytes per second versus the sequential writes at 4K at 1771. And if we go over to the random writes and random reads at 4K, we're seeing basically roughly the same numbers that we saw with the sequential writes and sequential reads. So again, I'm not really sure why these sequential reads with these small record sizes is having such a hit on these SSDs in RAID-0. Not really sure why that is, but that's kind of interesting. Okay, so next test is the RAIDZ1 of these 4 SSDs. So let's go ahead and do that setup. All right, so let's do zpool create data RAIDZ1, and we're gonna do NVMe 0 through 3 and 1. Oh, let's see, what do we have here? Okay, that's strange. Looks like it already created something. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I totally forgot that the system still has that whole SAS-3 SSD array, and that's showing up under /data. So there's already that pool, I think. Yeah, so, okay, so I need to put this somewhere else. Let's create a /data 2. All right, let's try this again. Okay, so we have /data 2, where we have the 1.1 terabytes of the 400 gigabyte SSDs in a RAIDZ1 configuration. So let's take a look at that. Yep. So now we are ready to go. Let's go into /data 2, and we'll start out with the DD test. All right, let's go. Well, hold on a second. That was not right. I'm writing to the wrong place here. So let me revise that. All right, let's try again. Okay, so over here, again, I saw DD maxing out at 100% CPU. So I don't think we were able to fully exploit the capabilities of these SSDs even in this configuration. So anyway, I will go ahead and record this. All right, now on to IO zone. All right, so we're gonna rerun the IO zone with a 1 gigabyte file per thread with a total of 32 gigabytes of data using 1 megabyte record sizes. All right, let's go. All right, IO zone is done. Let's go ahead and record the results. All right, next up, let's rerun that test with 4K record sizes. All right, here we go. All right, guys, I just remembered that we're not going to run the random IO at 4K because ZFS is, we're just using default settings. So it's 128 kilobyte record sizes. And with 4K, we're just going to be putting a lot of wear on the SSD. So I'm going to stop the IO zone run for the random IO test because we're just not going to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and record the sequential read and writes for 4K. All right, guys. So that's the final benchmark that we're going to run today. And just to take a quick look, under the 1 megabyte record size tests, we're seeing that the scale up is obviously not going to be linear. First, we have parity, and second, I think there's just overhead with ZFS. As before, I find that ZFS sequential reads or even random reads don't perform very well in terms of scaling up. We know that these 4 SSDs can scale up on sequential reads up to over 6 gigabytes per second. It's almost 6.5 gigabytes per second. With ZFS RAIDZ1, even though we're dedicating one drive to parity, we're seeing basically the performance level of a single SSD. So yeah, that doesn't seem great. The sequential writes scale up a little bit more, a little bit better, I think, almost linearly actually, if you consider that these are 4 SSDs, one of them is parity, so let's just say times 3. So if you take the 461 times 3, it's pretty close to that 1308 number. And similarly, yeah, so on writes we seem to be scaling up fairly well. On the reads, ZFS is just not scaling very well at all here. Anyway, perhaps some tuning might help there, I'm not really sure. But if we look at the sequential writes on the 4K read and write test, we're seeing a better performance on the sequential read 4K. That is compared to the sequential read with 1 megabyte. Yeah, so with 4K somehow that's performing better. With the sequential writes at 4K records, it's a little bit slower than this, but that's to be expected since we're using much smaller block sizes, so there's a higher IOPS load on those SSDs. But in general, the reads are not scaling very well. But this is, so let's actually compare this to, it's not a really great comparison because the other setup in the previous videos we had 8 SSDs involved. But if you look at this, let's look at 4K first. So we're looking at about 900 to about 2000, and this is a little bit better, just a tiny little bit better. So yeah, unfortunately I don't think we're really able to exploit the full capability of these NVMe SSDs with ZFS here. I mean, if this was the targeted performance IO pattern that I'm going for, like 4K sequential reads and writes, I think I would get more out of my money by going with the SAS-3 route, even though it's a slightly less performance here. I think that setup probably requires a little bit less components, So let's look at the large record size benchmarks here. So sequential writes and reads at 1 megabytes is looking at about 1600 to 1700. So 1600 to 1700. So with the SAS-3 setup, we actually got better performance than we're doing here. Now, granted, again, this is not a completely fair comparison because with the SAS-3 setup, we have 8 SSDs in play here with RAIDZ2 versus this is 4 SSDs, and this is, that's the most we can put in with this upgrade kit. So we're kind of limited to 4 SSDs, NVMe SSDs. But, put another way, I guess you could also compare, look at it as you're getting roughly the same performance level. I mean, this is actually a little bit higher than the NVMe scenario, but you're getting roughly the same performance level with half the number of SSDs. So, maybe that's a consideration. Maybe that's a factor in there. I don't know. I haven't looked at the price comparison between those SAS-3 and versus the NVMe, but, we're not seeing anything spectacular, at least in the RAID, the ZFS scenarios here. Now, if we look at just the pure, RAID-0 scenario, we're definitely seeing some great performance boosts here. Now, also keep in mind these P3600s are not great for write performance. So there is that, whereas the Hitachi SAS-3 SSDs that we use tend to perform fairly well with writes. So if you go back here, you'll see that we're getting about almost 650 megabytes per second writes per SSD, whereas these NVMe SSDs are limited to somewhere under 500. Okay, so again, you know, we're not really trying to do an apple-to-apple comparison, but I'm just kind of showing you the different types of scenarios, the different types of upgrade paths that are available in the R820 and R720 servers, and you know what type of performance you can kind of expect. Now, the sequential writes here, obviously, if you use a better SSD that has better sequential write performance, like again, remember up to about 2 gigabytes per second, you know, this actually might scale up a lot better. So I think the P3700 is a better NVMe SSD for sequential writes or just overall write performance. You know, so if we were using the P3700 instead, we'd probably see much better numbers. But just looking at the sequential read numbers, you can see this is 6,000, over 6,400 with 4 SSDs, 4 NVMe's, whereas this is 5,300 with 8 SAS-3 SSDs. So obviously the NVMe completely outperforms the SAS-3 setup with half the number of SSDs. Okay, so there's definitely some headroom here depending on the SSD you choose to use. Now keep in mind, again, with the PCIe 2.0 limit, you don't want to get something that's going to perform greater than the available PCIe bandwidth. But if you got something that's a little bit more performant than this P3600, especially on the write performance side, I think you could outperform the SAS-3 configuration that we set up from last time. All right, so you know, somebody in the comments in the last video, I think, mentioned, you know, what if you just use software RAID 5 or RAID 6? As I'm kind of discussing these results here, I'm a little bit curious because obviously we're seeing some sort of bottleneck with ZFS RAID-Z here. And I'm just kind of wondering also in my mind, what kind of performance could we get if we were to use, instead of ZFS RAID-Z, just MD-ADM software RAID 5 with these 4 SSDs. So you know what? Okay, this was a little bit unplanned, but let's go ahead and try that. Let's go ahead and tear down the ZFS pool there and set up these 4 SSDs. We're gonna go RAID 5. Okay, so kind of the equivalent of RAIDZ1. Yeah, let's go ahead and try that out. So sorry if this makes this video a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I'm just really curious. You know, by the way, I do read all your comments, and I thought that comment was pretty interesting. I do think it would be kind of interesting to compare how this would perform with parity RAID, but not in the ZFS variety of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that out. So first thing is I need to destroy, if I can spell destroy correctly, this pool here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just blow away all of this stuff here. So all the partitions that ZFS created. I'll do that with I'll just recreate the GPD label. All right, I've got that done. Now let's go ahead now and create a single partition across each of those SSDs. All right, so with that, I'm going to then create the RAID 5. So let's see if I remember how to do this. Create dev md0 RAID devices is going to be 4 devices, and we're going to do RAID 5 this time. Zero through 3 and 1 P1. Oh, why do I have resource busy here? Oh, I never stopped. Okay. I don't know. I forgot to stop the software RAID-0, and I'm already using these drives in other things. So I don't know. Let's see what happens there. Okay, let's see if this works. yeah, I should be a little bit more careful and actually stop the software RAIDs before I reutilize these things. Okay, yeah, looks like we have a RAID 5 running under dev md0. So let's go ahead and make that file system. All right, and then I will mount it. All right, so now we have 1.1 terabytes here of a RAID 5, software RAID 5 of those 4 SSDs under /data 2. All right, so let's go ahead and run that DD test. All right, so let's go ahead and record this. Okay, so we're seeing that 2150 number. Again, I think that's the single thread limitation of DD. I did see the CPU utilization for DD max out again at 100%. So, but anyway, let's go ahead and now run the IO zone test on this. All right, so this is going to be the same IO zone, 1 GB file sizes, 32 threads for a total of 32 gigabytes of data set, and record size of 1 megabytes. We're going to do the sequential write, read, and random read and writes with 32 threads. All right, let's go. Hey guys, so normally I would just fast forward through this section of the video, but I wanted to point out something here. We're looking at this single process here, MD0 RAID 5, maxing out the CPU at 100%. And if you look at the IO stat here, we're really not able to push the performance. So this is, I believe initially it's just a sequential write. So there's some reading going on here. I'm wondering if there's some sort of read modified write penalty that's going on. Like I said, I only used the default settings, so yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't know why there's a lot of reads going on here, but it looks like this might be a read modified write type of bottleneck happening, and we're really not seeing the great performance out of these SSDs. We know the SSDs can do much more than about 100 megabytes per second here, but I think that's because this process that is probably involved in calculating the RAID parity is maxing out at 100%, and so there might be that involved. There might be some read modified write amplification happening here too, and so this is not going to turn out well. I can already tell. Alright guys, so this has been running for a little while now, and I'm just going to break it and stop it. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Perhaps some tweaking is required here to optimize this RAID 5 to work better with these SSDs. But as you saw earlier, the performance was pretty bad. So I'm just not going to continue running this and put extra wear on my SSDs just to get a final number here, because the final number is going to be worse than what we had with RAID-Z5, or sorry, with RAIDZ1 anyway. And so I'm just going to stop this. Sorry, I've diverted to this. I thought it was, be kind of curious to see how RAID 5, software RAID 5 would perform here. But, there was something strange going on. As I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of reads going on versus writes. So that's unexpected when we're just doing a sequential write here. So I'm not really sure why that was happening. And there might be more involved here, but I don't want to make this video, super long here. This part was already kind of unplanned, but I just thought, I'd try it out. But anyway, I think we're going to end it here. All right, guys, just going back to looking at the benchmarks. Yeah, that RAID 5 thing somehow just wasn't working out. And so I'm not going to continue running that and putting extra wear on my SSDs just, to get a number that obviously is not really going to be very valuable. If we can figure out what tweaks need to be done with that software RAID 5 to make that work a little bit better, I might revisit this. But definitely we were already looking at, less than 4. Well, yeah, no, actually it was worse than that. It was like about 180, 190, so less than 200 megabytes per second in sequential writes, which is, for 4 SSDs in RAID 5, it's performing worse than a single SSD. So yeah, anyway, I'm just not going to do that. But anywho, guys, so this is the last video of this series. Hopefully these videos have helped you kind of open your eyes to some new upgrade options for your R820 or R720 server. I wanted to kind of demonstrate to you guys what all the different possibilities are. Some of them obviously not officially Dell supported, like the first two videos. This NVMe upgrade kit is an official Dell supported upgrade kit that you can install in the R820 or R720. Now you do have to have the models that have the 2.5-inch bays in order to do this upgrade. The models with the 3.5-inch bays will not be able to take this type of upgrade. I hope you guys found this useful. Sorry about that RAID 5 benchmark. That was just a little diversion, unplanned and totally unsuccessful. But anyway, just wanted to share that with you guys. If you enjoyed these videos, make sure to give me that thumbs up. And if you like this type of content, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you're new to my channel. Also, if you'd like to support my channel, check out my eBay store. I've got all sorts of server goodies for you there. And I'll leave a link to my eBay store down in the video description below. So go ahead and check those out. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.